What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Novichenko Whips YouTube channel. Today we are road tuning this 2003 Bugeye. This car looks pretty good for its age and especially mileage. This thing has over 300,000 miles. The engine in it has been swapped, of course. That's very common with Subarus throughout their lifespan. Overall, looks OEM-ish. I believe someone said it's like a hybrid swap. I'll verify the details on that here in a minute. But the owner's just looking for a tune to make it run reliably. I can see that there's been a kind of a catch can installed. Because this car is still on a mass airflow sensor, it might be a smarter idea to remove this ventilation filter, just because the engine could be getting a bit more air through this than what's metered with the MAF sensor. You can see this goes back into the inlet. So it's a changed inlet. It's a stock downpipe, so that's still kind of a restrictor. Think about it as trying to blow really hard through a little coffee straw with your exhaust. It's got like a generic intake. I think we can tune for that. Might be running a tiny bit off right now. No crazy leaks other than the power steering at the reservoir, which is pretty infamous with age. I'm looking here, it's fairly dry on the power steering pump. Just make sure overall with the higher mileage that you're running a good thicker oil, most likely. So even, 530 is okay, but for hot summers and hooning around, 540 I think is a safer bet. We're going to throw some zip ties on some of these vacuum hoses, just so I can see it's a little loose. So we'll just make sure everything is good and tight. I can see nothing is necessarily loose. I believe there's also possibly a check engine going on for the evap system, so we can deal with all of that through the open source software. I like the open source software. I learned to tune with Cobb a number of years ago, but sadly with the recent green speed initiatives, they've removed the ability to do TGV deletes, evap deletes or evap code deletes, secondary air pump deletes on the newer WRXs and STIs. All that stuff with age gets gummied up and causes limp modes where your car literally doesn't want to drive, really. But yeah, let's get to it. Let's go grab the laptop and see what the car is looking like. For tuning the, I think, 07 and older WRXs and STIs, it might be 06 and older, you need one of these jumpers, as well as to connect the two green connectors onto the driver's side dashboard right under there. I'm not going to shove my camera under there, but good to know if you're going to do any kind of flashing. You probably already know this if you have like a Cobb access port. It came with one of these. But let's go connect that and we'll take a look at if I'm able to read the ECU with the open source software and your Tatrix cable. The most important thing is being able to read the ECU, because if you can read it, you can write to it. Cobb and other pro tuners will often lock the ECU, which, fair to say, they want to keep their proprietary tunes and their software on lockdown so that no one copies them or rips them off. But that then means, through regular open source software, means you can't tune the car unless that tuner helps you. There is a method to get back to stock. I think you have to marry an access port and then unmarry it and put back the stock tune, but not everybody has an access port laying around, so there's other means around it. Let's say you bought a car without an access port, but it had a tune and you can't get it off. I think you can mail your ECU to like Cobb and get them to restore it to stock, but there's a small fee with that. Okay, plug in your Tatrix cable over there. You'll see a little light illuminate. Quick mention, a lot of these OBD2 connectors on these cars are just beat up from things being plugged in, unplugged, and so on and so forth. And so if you ever connect it to your laptop and you're not seeing a connection, or your logging is intermittent, it might be that you need to check the male and female connectors. Make sure the female ones are not all faloosy after what 15-20 years of driving and things being connected. Okay, we've opened our ECU flash software. We need to choose the correct ECU type or flash methods and the memory models of the ECUs. It's pretty simple. It's a 0203 WRX. Select that. Grab the key. ECU flash can be a little finicky with the order of operations, so I usually hit the read button here, the blue up arrow, and it'll get you this like warning screen. I'll flip the ignition to the second position and instantly push read. That seems to do the trick for me. Same with writing. Sometimes it'll give you a couple errors, as you can see here. We might need to try to redo it once or twice. Let's try this again. It's a little dance you have to do. So it's trying to do the bootloader. Nope. I do hear the car turn on dyno mode or test mode. You can see the check engine flashing, and I hear the fans running under the hood. So that's not an issue. And I also see the connection to the OBD2 cable is fine. Let's try this again. It's possible this car is previously tuned and locked, as I was mentioning earlier, which would mean we don't have many options on what we can do today, except for drive around real quick, take a quick cruise, see the logs and see if the tune is okay.
At this point, I had thought the ECU was locked, so I resorted to driving the car and doing some logging to make sure the tune was safe to drive the car as is. Later, I figured out how to read the ECU, so we were able to drive and tune the car properly.
Overall, in dyno mode or the test mode, when you have the connectors plugged in, to me it seems like the car still behaves differently from normal mode, so I wouldn't tune a car, unfortunately, in this mode. So when you do driving and logging, you have to unhook those test connectors to then go for a drive and then reconnect them for a flash. I do see that we're adding a bit of fuel, 4% learned, an additional 8 to 10% correction instantly. So my reader is working. With these catch cans, a lot of them come with kind of a vent little filter up top. And again, with the MAF metered cars, you want to block that off so the catch can just is a closed loop, so to speak, so that anything from the PCV goes in the can and then comes out back into the inlet. You don't want any unmetered air going into the engine with these mass airflow sensor cars, because you'll be running possibly a little bit lean, and thus in the log I was seeing it add 10-15% fuel. A little, you know, quarter to half inch diameter hole will suck in that much more air, causing the O2 sensor to read off and making that instant correction. Or the ECU is smart enough to make that instant correction, but technically your tune, you want to tune it to a point where you're within like 3 to 5% of constant correction. That's the rule of thumb. Just going to give a quick glance over everything else. Make sure nothing else is ripped or leaking. With the Subies, just make sure you have minimal to, no air leaks, and overall your car will be more happy. These little T's that usually go to like a boost gauge or something. Just want to make sure none of those little hoses will pop off easily. It looks fine right now, but when you're under boost, might give you a little goofing off. Okay, that seems to be in order. Oil level is good, everything looks pretty good. Let's go for a spin. All right, we're gonna go for a drive and do some logging. I have a number of profiles set up in the logger where it will have all the needed information that I usually look out for while driving. I do see still some correction, but I'll be able to tell a little bit better after this drive. I'll have this logger running on the side. I definitely don't sit there staring at your laptop while driving if you're doing this alone. Record a good log, pull over safely, and then inspect if you have, any knock, if you did a pull, or whatever else you're trying to see there. I'm seeing good manifold vacuum, so it seems to be the no leaks correction has died down a little bit, but as we drive we'll see that a little bit better. But yeah, pretty much start a log. If you need, there's a button to reset the data if you want to zero things out. It doesn't zero out the recorded log that's saved to your laptop, but let's say you did a pull and you had a little bit of something, correction, knock, timing, and you want to zero it out so that your min and maxes are zeroed out, you just hit that button and you're good to go. This is actually quite nostalgic for me. I learned my first car that I ever tuned was my brother-in-law's Bugeye, and that thing was a lot of fun. He bought it. We shouldn't have driven it home from Monroe, which is like an hour drive, and it was running horribly. I was kind of into Subarus, and it ran rough. It would only run if you were like part throttling it or full throttling it. Anywhere in between, it was just dying and chugging. And we're like, whatever, it's tunable, and he wanted a Subaru, it was cheap. What I should have done is looked a little bit closer under the engine bay. Sadly, the person had the bypass valve or the stock blow-off valve. The return hose to the inlet was completely disconnected from the inlet, and it was just sucking way too much extra air. And what you know what that means? The engine was running crazy lean. By the time we got home, it blew a head gasket, overheated. And so I ended up doing a head gasket job with my brother-in-law, and then had a lot of fun tuning it. We maxed out the stock injectors of the WRX, and then we slapped my old STI injectors on there and maxed those out with like a 16G turbo, then an 18G turbo. It was fun, but you can always remember your first tuning experiences. Good times. These older cars, there are less parameters to mess with. The newer cars, they just kept adding tables to the maps and stuff. And again, these older cars support speed density through Carberry, which is pretty cool. This car is not on that, it's just on a MAF. Nice little grind. I think this clutch, you gotta press it in all the way. Stock downpipe, but it does have an exhaust. Feels pretty good. Sounds pretty good. Could use a short shifter. Look at this. It's a spoon in a bowl. This reminds me of my first BMW E30. You could literally just play with the shifter like this while you're in gear. Hilarious. I mean, the check engine did come on, and I see there's a lot of correction being made. No knock of any sort, which is good, but I think just because the fueling is way out of whack, that it's complaining. We'll get to a spot here and pull over, and I'll read the code that it's unhappy about. Overall, the car is drivable, but it's not ideal to drive it like this long term, because I see it's just continually adding a bit more fuel. These ECUs are smart. The more you drive it, the more fuel it will learn to add, but still you want to be dialed in with the tune for all the various conditions that you put the car through, and especially if you're going to enjoy it, mad on it, have a little bit of fun. get on it a little bit. Boop. So you can see we had a split instant of it pulling 2 degrees. As I mentioned in my previous videos, a lot of tuners will ignore anything that's like a -1 up to -2 of knock, because it could be phantom knock. If you see a number that's lower than -2, that would be concerning, and in the tune you'd usually pull a degree of timing or so. But let's read this. Read your diagnostic codes. What is she telling us? Misfire cylinder 4. Okay. It could be a spark plug, could be a coil pack. We'll see. I might have some spares at home. Cylinder 4 on these cars usually runs the hottest. That's why people do the 4th cylinder cooling mod. Cylinder 4 is pretty much the one closest to the driver. I'm gonna clear the codes. And if it comes back, I'll go home and switch out a coil pack or look at the spark plug. Yeah, after resetting the ECU, I can see that it's adding quite a bit of fuel. It says up to 25%. I know it's probably because of that aftermarket intake. So it's getting more air, of course, but the engine now needs to figure out how to compensate for that. So all things considered, I'm just gonna cruise it for now. No wide open throttle pulls. I'm gonna let it relearn a bit, and then maybe we'll give it a slight pull somewhere. We'll do a little drive-by. I'm just gonna try to recreate the code for the check engine light to come on. We'll see.
Later on, after checking everything out, after canceling those codes, the check engine light did not come back as I drove around, which confirmed with me that the tune definitely needed to be revised. This confirms the fact that slapping parts, intakes, exhausts on a Subaru definitely requires a tune to run properly.
There's a nice little way to check for blow-by in your system. If you unscrew the oil fill, and so you can tell how much blow-by an engine has. Quite interesting, right? So all of that positive crankcase pressure could indicate just some worn seals or some worn piston rings in general. I mean, the engine has over 100K miles. What did they say? 150, 160. And technically, when I shut that, most of that positive crankcase pressure will be going through this hose and through the catch can and then back into the intake. Formerly, the PCV would just be spitting all that back into the intake mixed with oil vapors and stuff. Let's open this catch can and see what's all going on in there and see if it's doing its job correctly. Overall, she purrs pretty good. As always, you drive a Subaru, and if you love it, 530 is Subaru recommended. I always put 540, maybe even thicker in the hot summers. After you drive, get on a level plane and check your oil level. For example, Subaru seems to have changed this oil, but it was on the lower level, so I had to add a bit of oil to top it off. Fun little car. All right, pulled out the catch can. You can see it has some of this like wire brush or Scotch-Brite in it. Let's see if anything comes out. So it's not oil, it's more like condensation, but still, it's doing its job, which is good. All of that positive crankcase air is going through this, getting filtered out for any liquids, and just the air is passing back into the engine. If you're gonna run without a catch can at all on your Subaru, I don't think it's a good idea. These things need all the help they can get to be healthy. Car's definitely not too loud. with the stock downpipe. It's just a nice mellow rumble. You still get a good sound. You could probably daily this without. Now it's full throttle for a split second. A good spot here, a big old straightaway for a wide open throttle pull. Might give it a little bit, not full throttle. The fueling looks good. It's actually not bad. Stock turbo and stock downpipe. Again, she's just blowing through that coffee straw. You could probably hoon this around a little bit in gears 1, 2, 3. 4 and 5 are just your freeway cruisers. This is such a fun road to drive. I'm very lucky to live out here and literally tune in my backyard. Minimal traffic usually. I sense a little bit of floatiness, and I think the if they're factory shocks, they're blown. This thing would benefit from some aftermarket suspension upgrades like coilovers. The most common being like the BC Racing. I also noticed maybe slightly the rear alignment is off, so it's pulling slightly. But what do you expect from a 300,000 mile car? That's still a ripper. Still more fun to drive than so many things today. So many new cars. So far, log is going good. I'm almost a little nervous. Third gear. Yeah, I don't have space to redline it because I don't trust a little bit of the floatiness, but it's still fun. We're gonna have to stop and do a little exterior video. It should be fun. Let's head back to the house here. See if we can make some adjustments whatsoever through the open source software. Overall, wide open throttle. The car is in a moderately safe tune. Right now it's a cool day, so it's not pulling much timing, but I feel like if it were a hot day and you heat soaked enough, it could be an issue. It could be a concern. The one thing that is concerning me is just the very light throttle driving, like normal driving. I see the ECU is doing quite a bit of learning to add fuel because of the extra air coming in through that intake, and that's the drivability with the tune could be improved drastically. It would just feel even smoother than it is. Overall, the car is not jittery. It's not bucking, but overall, it can be improved. But yeah, stock boost. Still very, very fun on these twisties because you don't need crazy power. You need the good power band. And this little turbo spools instantly. Yeah, I think it's a TD04. Got a nice E39 Beamer behind us. Get a little turbo whistle here and there. It's starting to rain a bit. just sound good. That spool is instant. You give it like a tenth of throttle. That's why people like the little turbos. They die up top, but the response is great. Yeah, to feel more confident in this car, you just need some suspension work. Third gear, 80, not bad. Just a little floaty. I don't want to go any faster than that. Woo! You can feel the speed of these little cars because because of all the activity going on. Let's just cruise it from here on out. So something I do with most cars when tuning, you want to get a full log of like a third or fourth gear, maybe 2.5, 3K, and then mat it, and then just get a full log of, you know, running the car towards red line. On these WRXs, the gears are quite long, and so you might be going well over 100 at the top of fourth. On the dyno, that's not a problem. On the roads here, that is a problem, depending on your brakes and suspension. And so I tend to do third gear pull. On the STIs, you can knock out a fourth gear pull. From my perspective, what that helps you see is timing across the rev range, across the load band, and so you can know where to pull back some timing in case there's some knock, and you can also see that the boost control is doing what it needs to do. Let me let this Beamer in front of us. Let's do a quick pull. Let me reset the log. It does look like there's a car on the left. I don't think they're pulling out. Nope. Okay. So what this will do is help me see the log. Wasn't quite red line. I'm just not trusting the suspension. And we could have started a little earlier. Just saw a car, wanted to be a little more cautious. The brakes are not bad. It's the suspension. You could probably rally this on some dirt roads and it would be okay. But on the road, you want more direct and solid feeling suspension. Yeah, considering the boost, car is running pretty good. It has more in it. You need to do the downpipe. Factory downpipe is the biggest restriction on these cars. And heat is always the enemy of power. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you on the laptop, see if I can provide any more tips and tricks.
wanted to discuss what I like to log in ROM Raider Logger. You can only log a certain number of parameters until it starts to really take up the bandwidth and slow down the amount of logging or the frequency. So you want to be picky and choose the best parameters to look after. Anyway, we can see that the car is targeting 13.6 psi of boost. That's like a stock or a little over stock. We were only able to manage 7.25. My thought is it's the restrictive downpipe, possibly a clogged cat, considering how old these cars are. So opening up the downpipe would definitely get you to that target boost. We can see that the boost error, of course, is all right. I'm back. My laptop had died. Something that I wanted to highlight is we did figure out how to read the ECU. It was just a combination of voltage drop here and there, and so we actually got some tuning done on Colton's car. I want to return and talk a little bit more about the parameters that I like to log and then review after doing any kind of driving or pulls on the car. For starters, overall air fuel correction, air fuel learning, you need those. You need the air fuel sensor parameter for your front O2 sensor or the upstream one. You need engine speed, RPMs, ignition total timing, also important to keep an eye on. Injector duty cycle is pretty important if you're probably near maxing out your turbo and injectors, so that this will give you an idea of where you're at. Intake air temps, also important. Mass airflow by voltage, I believe this is. And then you want your primary wastegate percentile or duty cycle. So from factory, it'll be anywhere in the 70%. When you upgrade your electronic boost controller, this value could be lowered or edited depending on what you need. The factory controller is a little bit weaker than like a 3-port aftermarket, and so that's where that comes in. Throttle opening angle, closed loop versus open loop fueling. This helps with tuning for the both closed loop and open loop parts of driving. Engine load, that's calculated, and of course you want to keep an eye on feedback knock, fine knock learning. The final fueling that's calculated, you're going to compare that usually to your actual air fuel sensor reading and see if that's spot on or near what you're requesting. The global IM value, or the dynamic advance multiplier, on the 16-bit ECUs on the older cars, this is a value between 1 and 16. On the newer cars, it's usually a value between 0 and 1. And you want it to be at the highest value to indicate that your car is happy running without knock. Ignition base timing, this is just the base table for ignition, and of course there's other compensation and adjustments that happen for you to come up with your final ignition total timing, or the final timing that you get. Going back here, manifold relative pressure. This is pretty much similar to what you would see on a boost gauge, both negative and positive for vacuum and positive for boost pressure. If you go to absolute pressure, it'll show a different number, of course, taking into account your elevation. So that would be like a MAP reading, manifold absolute pressure. I like seeing relative, just helps me gauge whether we're in vacuum and boost when I'm looking at tuning stuff. Mass airflow, I think this is the grams per second, so this is important also for your air fuel mixture and when you do the scaling for the mass airflow table. Target boost is also important. You can see if you're actually able to hit your targets. As we saw, this car is not hitting the target of 13 psi under wide open throttle, and so we're going to work to see if we can install some upgrades to the up pipe, which came catted in a couple of these older cars, and downpipe. And the volumetric efficiency, you don't need to monitor that. I think that's just hanging out here from a previous setup. That doesn't really have anything to do with manifold, mass airflow sensor cars. I did want to take a second and look at the tune itself. This is pretty much what a stock ECU configuration will look like, where it's a mass airflow metered car and it's not on speed density. What's important, right? The main tables are usually target boost. There's various boost control limits. The wastegate tables, pretty important for initial and max. We also really want to look at primary open loop fueling. So this one's already updated map, but from the factory, you'll notice that like anywhere from 0.9 and up, the factory fuel map goes really rich, really quick. I've noticed that cars like smoother transitions. Let's try to look at like a little 3D of this. It might not look as great. Yeah, it's way too flat. The boost 3D tables look better. It's pretty flat because these values are really close to one another. Like, you know, 11 and 14, not a big difference there. And so the quick idea is you don't want steep drop-offs in your fueling or timing or boost. The car likes smooth transition. That doesn't mean you can't ramp up quickly for, like, let's say your boost or something or timing, but you don't want it to just be jaggedy and jump off. And so if you were going for better fuel economy, you could almost take this section where you see the green and yellow and move these values even more slightly up in terms of targeted air fuel. And then of course, once you're on the throttle, this is the area that you're at where your engine load is higher and your RPMs grow. And so that's where you see we're really richening it up to make sure that we're running safe without any detonation. You could infinitely, you know, edit this table, change things. One thing you'll notice with the stock turbo cars, your load is not that high. It goes up to almost like a engine load of 2 grams per revolution. When you upgrade your turbo, when your car is highly modified, it's important to rescale this table, meaning this value will sometimes go up to like a 3 or 4. What's hurt there is that you don't get more columns. This is all you get. So you have to change your resolution. Oftentimes, what you'll do is, let's say this 1.98, it'll move over somewhere to like here, and then you'll have to rescale the rest of these to condense, and then you'll have to grow from here and scale up to like a 3 or a 4, depending on what size injectors you run in turbo. So like on my previous cars that you had like a 20G turbo, 1000cc injectors, you would scale this number to nearly a 4, because that's the amount of load that the engine is experiencing, calculated with the grams of pretty much air coming in per rev and so on and so forth. Good thing to know. But with the factory turbo, you can usually stay around the factory settings for the maps. You can also see, here's like a fail-safe fueling map. It's kind of all over the place, right? It's just, I don't see much smoothness going on here, but of course they're trying to really richen it up. This isn't the case where your IM or DAM, dynamic advanced multiplier, really drops down. They're trying to like save your engine, so to speak. That's why they have so much fuel coming in. It's like pig rich, as they call it. Okay, another thing that I like to focus on is your closed loop fueling target. This is like when you're, let's say, cruising on the freeway and you just want your good MPGs. From factory, this number is like a 14.4. Stoic and the best mixture for cars and Subies is 14.7. So if you put this here, the car will try to hit a mixture of 14.7. 14.7 measures of air to 1 measure of fuel. And so that's way better than 14.4. Over a lot of miles, you're going to see better MPGs. Kind of a quick tip there. You always can always play around with what they call your
closed loop to open loop transitions, and there's different conditions under all of these ABCDs. But I think these are in milliseconds. And so some of these values, you can see up to 2000 milliseconds, which is like 2 seconds. So it would seem like under certain throttle inputs and changes, it could take up to 2-3 seconds for your engine to switch from the closed loop fueling to open loop fueling, where the open loop fueling is this table that you pre-program for the car to run off of. All right. Last but not least, something I want to talk about is timing. Here's the base timing table. From the factory, the timing is also a little bit jumpy. They'll have like extra high timing here, and then they will drop it off here, and then they'll ramp it up again here. I'd say this section is kind of like lower load, maybe anything under a 1, and then everything over a 1 is more like boost when you're in boost. This car, with the current boost that it's running, I think we only saw a timing, or sorry, load of up to like 1.64, 1.7. And so you can see at some places, base timing peaking at like 14.4, which is plenty safe. With the Subarus, I think a moderate tune is about 15 degrees of timing at wide open throttle. 20 degrees of timing is quite aggressive. Some tuners like to completely remove what they call this knock control advance table. And what this is, this pretty much means under certain conditions, if the car is happy, it can add up to this much timing. And so you'll notice that, you know, as you drive, this gives the car some freedom to add or pull back some timing due to the conditions, the heat, the knock events, and so forth. Some tuners like to zero out this table and simply request timing exactly what they want here. Various methods work. I think it all depends on, you know, maybe if the tuner is looking for complete control and trying to really squeeze out everything out of the car, and they want to have complete control over the initial base timing, they would just put exactly what they want here and zero out this table and not give the ECU as much freedom to add and pull back. There's various other things like limits that you can do. I like raising the idle for the cars a little bit, especially, you know, with modifications, our cars might need a little bit higher idle speed to run. And then a lot of deletes. There's various codes that your car can throw. There's a lot of codes you should not delete, right? You don't want to delete like your misfire codes, because if you hit off on your cylinder 1 misfire code, your cylinder 1 will still continue to misfire. If it does, it just won't tell you about it, and that's bad. But let's say you removed your TGVs, right? And there's quite a few codes for the TGVs. You could easily remove those here from the tune, and your TGV sensors, or sorry, your TGVs and the controllers and the butterfly valves can be removed, and you can peacefully enjoy your car without a limp mode. So you have to do a bit of research, you know, in terms of deletes and what you should or should not disable. Like, definitely do not disable your knock sensor. That would not be smart. But things like evap, if you remove your evap system, there's a plethora of codes for those. Hopefully this helps. There's a lot of resources on romraider.com, the forums, if you just want to install this software and start tinkering with your car. My suggestion is pull your stock map and save it as it is, and then save out, like, you know, another copy that you can start making small changes on, right? Don't request 25 pounds of boost from your stock car. Maybe, you know, adjust a few things here and there and start seeing what works for you. That's my recommendation. And as long as you set up your logger to keep an eye out for anything that's alarming or making the car unhappy, you should be able to slowly get into tuning your car. All this software is pretty much free. Thanks a lot.